To our panel and our moderator, Caitlin, fantastic conversation. I'm George Jackson, Director of Events here at GovExec, and it's my great pleasure to be here today with Rear Admiral Nevin Carr, Jr., Vice President and U.S. Navy Strategic Account Executive at Leidos. Admiral, great to see you. Thanks for being here, sir.
Thank you very much, George. It's a pleasure to be here.
So let's jump right in. Give our audience a little bit of background about your career. Set the stage for us.
About 34 years, depending on how you count. The 4 years at the Naval Academy don't really count because you're getting something from the country, not giving to the country. But in any case, about 34, mainly as a surface warfare officer, mostly East Coast, but, Navy ships go all over the world. My last job with the Navy was Chief of Naval Research, which is a wonderful job in Washington, dealing with a lot of emerging and disruptive technologies, some of which I think we're going to talk about today.
Well, let's jump right into at least one of those areas, and that's autonomous vessels. I've heard various definitions out in the community defining autonomous vessels. Would you give me yours?
It's a good question and an important point because the word autonomy and autonomous vessels is being thrown around a lot out there. It's important to remember that the behavior that defines an autonomous system, in other words, allowing a system to act as if a person were driving it or guiding it, that's important behavior. The ability to sense and avoid, to not run aground if you're a ship or an underwater vehicle, to not crash if you're an aircraft, and importantly, not to run into other things. We call that collision avoidance and complying with the regulations for prevention of collisions at sea, or COLREGs. That is an important and essential behavior, but that's not full autonomy. If you go inside the skin of the vessel, you also, to have a truly autonomous vessel, need to be able to operate without human intervention. That can be done with ships that were not designed that way, that were designed for people to operate machinery. And if you add in features at great cost to automate those, you can behave autonomously. Or obviously, we feel the smart way to do that is design from the keel up to optimize the design around autonomous operation, to have a system that not only behaves autonomously outside the skin of the vessel, but inside as well, that knows when missions are going to be assigned, that knows when to light off generators or shift switchboards if a mission's coming up and more power is going to be required, and to do all those things inside the vessel that normally require human intervention. In fact, one of the limiting factors in endurance for autonomous vessels is lube oil. So designing engines or having propulsion systems that don't have to have people manning the engineering plant to shift lube oil systems around is just one example of many.
At Leidos, you're working on at least two, the Sea Hunter and the Seahawk. Tell us a little bit more about those. Maybe start with the Sea Hunter.
Well, they're both actually twins. The Sea Hunter was a program that came out of DARPA. It was originally intended to be an autonomous vessel that could be placed in contact with a submarine and maintain that contact all by itself. As often happens with emerging or new technologies, as soon as it began to take shape, the DARPA hard original mission sort of took a back seat to all the many other things that the Navy and the services and industry realized that these vessels could perform. So there has been a lot of attention on other missions. Of course, it's the job of the Navy to define missions. Industry just provides the technology to support them. Seahawk was a repeat design. There were some minor modifications. It was produced down in Mississippi. And Seahawk went to sea earlier this year, arrived in San Diego, and within days of its arrival, was immediately assigned to do an integrated battle problem exercise and went off for multiple days, completely autonomous under fleet supervision. So it delivered, it worked, and it worked well.
I'd like to talk a little bit about mission, Admiral. You've worked, in government at ONR, as you mentioned. You're in industry now. those two sides come together when it comes to mission. And I'm curious, how these types of technologies are important or going to be important with the Navy's mission going forward.
Well, as I said, it's the Navy's job to define the missions. That's what they do. Industry can suggest ways to do things, but it's ultimately the responsibility of the service, Army, Navy, and Air Force, to say what they really want to do. Industry, and even when I was at ONR, our job as technologists there was to help the warfighters perform those missions in new and hopefully better ways. Some of the technologies that are emerging today are being developed not under government control, but based on civilian demand and customer demand, and that's a good thing in a free market economy. But it also means that the military has to adapt the way it does things sometimes to those technologies. So it can reach in and impact the way missions are performed, but the fundamental definition of missions is a military function.
Let's switch gears and focus on communication a little bit here. In that sort of back and forth between the Navy or between government and industry, what have you seen as far as sort of successful communication-based relationships there? What should organizations replicate?
Well, open communication is absolutely critical. We say it all the time. We hear it all the time. It's not as easy to actually do. And the folks in the acquisition community of the Navy are hardworking. They work within a structure that is very demanding. It's not easy to buy these complex systems. So the more we're talking back and forth, I think it's better for all of us. The better industry can provide what the government is looking for, and the more the government communicates what it needs, obviously the more industry can spend its research dollars and its effort to make sure they're scratching the right itch. So as we know, two-way communication is absolutely critical. Easy to say, not always easy to do, but we've got to keep trying to keep those dialogues open. It's one of the reasons we really appreciate dialogues like the one you're having in this webinar that help to facilitate that two-way dialogue.
Well, we equally appreciate you being here. Admiral, let's talk a little bit about the challenges faced in this autonomous arena. What are some of the top challenges?
Well, there are no shortage of challenges. I will say that at the top of the list is not the technology itself. In many cases, the technology is available and it's out there. It's not perfect, but as emerging technologies come on the scene, as I mentioned, often driven by commercial or customer demand, not so much by the military, it offers an opportunity to think about doing things in different ways and using the technology that's available rather than our traditional construct of a well-vetted requirement in the Pentagon sense of the word that then has a well-structured program of record that matches up with that requirement. That takes time and it takes a lot of effort. And it's never going to go away as a process, but there is an opportunity for certain emerging technologies to be procured rapidly and pushed out in prototype fashion so that the services can develop concepts of ops. They can learn how they might use these technologies. They can refine the technologies and then communicate back to industry how to make them even better to make sure, as I said, we're scratching the right itch. So the model in an environment of emerging and disruptive technologies is forever changed. It will never be back to the way we were buying things in the 60s and 50s and 70s when the government was supplying a large share of research dollars in this country. It's a much more difficult environment to perform in, particularly in a complex bureaucracy like the government. They have to be careful. You can't just buy things without testing them. They have to obviously perform and be reliable. So it's a different balance, but there are definitely implications for how you do that in an emerging technology environment.
Admiral, before you go, I'd like to talk a little bit about, I guess, passion for lack of a better word. My brother was in the Navy, spent 6 years in. He was a rescue swimmer. And, we had grown up, I think, like you, on boats. My dad had a sailboat. I think there's a real sort of nostalgia aspect to the Navy, which is an important part of their culture. But the area where you work and breathe these days is very future focused. We're talking about emerging technology. And I'm just curious how you balance those two, this nostalgia, this love for the history of the Navy, but also pushing the envelope in a field like autonomous.
Well, that's an interesting question because the Navy is obviously a very traditional organization, and the country is a maritime nation. We are always going to need free and open seas. We're always going to need a Navy to ensure those free and open seas. So balancing the Navy's love for and passion for tradition, as you say, that's in our culture. And when I say our, I mean the Navy. The new environment where things change so rapidly, it's hard to adapt to. And that, as we touched on with talking about challenges, those changes don't come quickly. But at the end of the day, the world's changing so fast. Technology is evolving so rapidly. We're going to have to make sure that we can keep up with that technology, whether it's software production, our computer programs for our combat systems, or radical changes like autonomous systems that can help keep our warfighters out of harm's way and do the dull, dirty, and dangerous tasks that we'd rather not have people do.
Well, thanks for getting a little philosophical there with me, Admiral. I really appreciate your time today.
Thanks for yours, and thanks for what you do. And again, thanks for helping facilitate open dialogue.
A final thanks to our audience for tuning in, and for Leidos for making programs like this one possible. For GovExec, I'm George Jackson.